The humanitarian situation in Gaza continues to deteriorate as fighting intensifies. The United Nations now estimates that around 85% of the population in Gaza has been displaced, and those now living in tents are struggling with strong winds and heavy rain as winter approaches. The Hamas-run health ministry says more than 18,000 people have been killed in Gaza since October 7th, including many women and children. Yesterday, Canada voted in favor of a non-binding United Nations resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza.
Canada remains deeply concerned by the humanitarian crisis and its severe impacts on Palestinian civilians, especially women and children. The ongoing humanitarian crisis has weighed heavily in Canada's decision to support this resolution.
For more on the humanitarian situation in Gaza, I'm joined by Danny Glenwright. He's the president and CEO of Save the Children Canada. Danny, it's good to speak with you again.
Good to be with you again, David.
I believe the last time we spoke was in October when you and other organizations called for a ceasefire. What was your reaction yesterday when you learned that Canada would join the call and vote for that UN resolution?
Well, our reaction was it's about time. You know, we're very encouraged by this news, and we feel it is the only way to protect the lives of at least 1 million children in Gaza who are right now hanging in the balance. We've joined over the past 2 months with humanitarian organizations across the world and across this country, as well as millions of Canadians from coast to coast to coast, to press the government to call for a ceasefire. So we welcome this news, and we welcome Canada, you know, getting on the right side of history and reclaiming its position in that space, because we are a country of peacekeeping. We are a country that respects international humanitarian law. We're a country that champions a feminist international assistance policy. And so this is the right thing for Canada to do. It is overdue, but it's better late than never. So we definitely welcome that news.
But, you know, Israel's ambassador to Canada, Ido Moed, he was on the show last night right after the vote. He said Israel was not going to stop. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said the same thing. This has been made very clear that Israel is not feeling obliged to comply with this non-binding resolution. So how optimistic are you that it actually will achieve the outcome that you're hoping for?
You know, David, in the face of the atrocities that we're seeing right now in Gaza, we have to remain optimistic that a ceasefire will happen, and we are calling for it as soon as possible. We need to keep pushing. We need to keep sounding the alarm. You know, every time I've spoken with you, the numbers just grow and grow and grow, and they get higher and higher. And you know, whether it's the number of children killed, whether it's the number of hospitals that are still functional, whether it's the number of ambulances that have been destroyed, this number of schools that have been damaged or destroyed, it gets worse by the day. And we continually get worried at Save the Children because since the pause in fighting, aid has been much more limited than beforehand. And so we're seeing a weaponization of aid. We're seeing violations of international humanitarian law. And this week at Save the Children, it's really cut close to the bone. We've been mourning one of our colleagues who was killed in an Israeli airstrike earlier this week, along with his entire family. And if you'd let me, I would like to just read their names, because
Please.
We don't pause often enough to actually acknowledge the people that have been killed. Sami was killed along with his wife, Fatima, his 4 children, Mohammed, age 12, Heba, age 11, Zaina, age 3, and Zain, age 2, along with 28 members of his extended family. And Sami was known by our colleagues as somebody who was full of laughter. He was delivering coffee every morning to his colleagues. He often was dancing when the team met. A person full of life is now taken, and we've been mourning him today at Save the Children. More aid workers have been killed in Gaza by Israeli airstrikes than at any time of any conflict in history. If this list of horrors is not enough for the world to call for a ceasefire, I put my hands up in despair, David. It's really overwhelming, and I don't know when we say enough is enough and when Israel says enough is enough.
I'm very sorry to hear about your colleague. Unfortunately, you're not the first spokesperson for an aid group we've had on who has recounted this type of loss, right? The UNRWA has lost north of 100 people at the last count that I saw. What about the rest of your people in Gaza, Danny? Do they have homes? Do they have shelter? Are they in tents? Like, what is the situation for them?
You know, they're faced with inconceivable decisions right now, like most Gazans. 1.93 million Gazans have been forcibly displaced, and all of our staff have been displaced. And when we speak to them, they say, You know, we desperately need food and water for ourselves and our family. But we have the choice of, do we leave right now where we're staying to go in search of those basic necessities, to go and try to find that aid? Or should we just stay here so that at least we die with our families? What kind of a choice is that? You know, we're also seeing, many places where Gazans have been pushed or told to go ostensibly where it was going to be safer, which is a sham pretense for moving them because they're not safe. These areas have been bombed. And we know that now these areas in what is already the most densely populated place on the planet, you know, people are being pushed into smaller and smaller areas. And overcrowding is a significant issue. And people were worried about the spread of disease. You know, the other thing, which is awful to think about, is the number of bodies that are piling up from the number and the alarming number of deaths is a public health issue in itself. Only 25% of hospitals are still functioning. And the body count, the dead bodies that are piling up in those hospitals that we haven't been able to bury yet, and when they do, they're putting them in mass graves. People are worried about disease from them, including our teams there. So the situation is as bleak as it can get. And really, this is why we're saying this is not a pathway to healing. This is not a pathway to accountability. The only way that we can end this suffering for all involved is a ceasefire.
I'm not certain we're going to see it, though. You know, and I know your charity focuses specifically and acutely on the needs of children. And you've described a situation that it would be a hellscape to live in, obviously, and the inability to get proper levels of aid in since the resumption of hostilities. What is your sense of what is happening with kids in Gaza now as it's moved into this post-pause phase, this military operation?
I don't even want to imagine what it is to be a child right now in Gaza, what it is to bombs raining down where you are. Half of schools have been destroyed. In many cases, these were schools where people were told to shelter, and they've been hit by airstrikes. Living in the type of conditions that I've described, fleeing from fighting, looking into your parents' eyes and seeing that they are terrified and don't have solutions for you. And then you have a pause and a respite, you know, and we saw children playing during that time. We saw families collecting together by the seafront. To go back to these horrors, to the terror that children are experiencing right now. And remember, children living in Gaza, they've spent their entire lives under siege, behind a blockade where they weren't able to leave, where movement was restricted. And there's been escalations of violence over their entire lifetime. So they've already experienced trauma. Before this latest escalation, I think I told you on one of these discussions that 75% of kids in Gaza felt absolutely hopeless about the future. I can't imagine that number isn't almost 100% now. I can't imagine being in that situation and not feeling hopeless. You know, I was thinking today about kids in Canada and what they've experienced during COVID. Pales in comparison to what children in Gaza are experiencing. And the mental health crisis for children will impact them for years to come.
Danny Glenwright, President and CEO of Save the Children Canada, thank you for joining us, and please accept my condolences on the loss of Sammy and Fatima and their children. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.